Okay, so that's our big talking point on India at 9 tonight. Has Pakistan paid a heavy price for failing to rein in terror groups? Let me introduce our guests who are joining us on our first talking point on India at 9 this evening. Ambassador K.C. Singh, former diplomat. Also joining me, Lieutenant General retired Raj Kadian. He's of course been the former Deputy Chief of Army Staff. Amit Barua, the Hindu's resident editor in Mumbai, joining us from that city. And Wajahad S. Khan, senior journalist, joining us via Skype from Islamabad. Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us here on India at 9. Ambassador K.C. Singh, if I can first start with you. There are two incidents that took place on Sunday. We, of course, know of this bloody Karachi siege for which the Pakistan Taliban has claimed responsibility, but the other in which 23 Pakistan citizens, pilgrims, who were actually returning from Iran from a pilgrimage, were killed in Taftan. My question to you is, do you believe it would be prudent to say that both, in a sense, perhaps are interrelated, actually as a part of the Pakistan Taliban's terror campaign because of all the operations that have been happening in North Waziristan?
No, they are related in a very broad sense, that radical Islam and different groups, because the groups that have been going after the Shias in Pakistan would be different, Lashkar-e-Jangvi and so on and so forth.
True.
But they share many of the ideologies. Some of the, maybe even the troops are common between them who are working for them, but otherwise their motivations are different. What we are seeing in Karachi is essentially something which is a fallout from the split in the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan split into two groups, which was seen as a great success on the part of ISI, Pakistan government, because they managed to wean away the Masood tribesmen, which was about half the strength of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, what is called the Sajna group. So what was left behind was the leader of the group, who is the leader of the group, and with him he's basically got the non-Masood elements. He is from the Swat Valley. Fazlullah is from the Swat Valley, and
True.
he heads the residual or the main TTP. Now from this division, this thing has come up because Fazlullah has to now show that his group is relevant.
True.
His group is able to hit. Whereas the other group had been weaned away because that was closer to the Haqqani group, closer to the Afghan Taliban, closer to now the ISI and the Pakistani elements and the Punjabi groups which target India. So you have a division in that.
Absolutely, and I think, in fact, that's the very statement that has come in from Pakistan Taliban. Amit Barua, what stands out, in fact, about this siege is that despite all those divisions in the Pakistan Taliban, as Ambassador K.C. Singh has pointed out, this particular group has been able, or has shown that it has the ability to launch these big high-ticket attacks, these spectacular attacks, in a sense, capturing the international age. After all, this is one of the busiest and the largest airports in Pakistan, where such a coordinated and a well-thought-out strike has been managed.
Well, absolutely, Anubha. I think the fact that the airport was attacked, it comes at a time when the new civilian government is trying to restore the economy, or at least is talking about that. And such a high-profile strike at the Karachi airport, which is the busiest airport in Pakistan, the commercial capital of the country, it sends a signal yet again to the rest of the world that Pakistan is not safe and that these kinds of attacks might just happen. Already the image about Pakistan as a country where violence, terrorist violence, extremist violence, the hold of these extremist groups is there for all to see. So this just comes and it shows exactly what you're saying. That the lethal striking power of the Taliban, whatever you call them, these groups, is evident. And I think there's very little doubt in my mind that Pakistan really faces an existential choice. The talk of negotiating, what we've seen over the past few weeks, I think the Taliban have shattered that myth once and for all. I don't believe that you can really negotiate with such groups. You have to take them on. But at the same time, I think the political conditions to take these groups on are absolutely essential. And politically, we see many of the political parties in Pakistan have moved closer to the Taliban in terms of their ideological approach. So in a real sense, what is happening is that the country has been driven to despair, and ordinary people who want to live a normal life just like anywhere else today find themselves victims of these terrorists, of these militant elements. And it is in a sense really up to the government and to the military that their time has come to take a call. I mean, over the years, many a time where major attacks have happened, we've seen this, whether the naval base was hit or the army headquarters was hit, or, you know, a big school was hit, police training school was hit near Lahore. So we've had many of these high profile incidents. But when you hit an airport with, you know, the kinds of scenes that we've seen,
yes,
you know, since
and the
this morning,
ramifications.
I mean, the signal is very clear.
Lieutenant General Qadian, the Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's office in a statement actually indicated that terrorists in a sense had a plan to bring down our aviation industry.
First of all, any terrorist attack anywhere in the world leads to loss of innocent lives, and it's condemnable. Our hearts go out to all the people who have suffered, their families. The world today recognizes Pakistan as the foremost country which is supporting terrorism. They are using terrorists to further their strategic aims, both in Afghanistan and in India through Kashmir. Now, when you nurture these terrorists, a stage will come when they will turn against you. I mean, if you are trying to light a fire to burn a neighbor's house, you have to be prepared to get some of the flames. That is unfortunately what is happening in Pakistan today. The Tehreek-e-Taliban, whose main philosophy is to act against the government, Pakistani government. There are more than 20 formations of these terrorists, Haqqanis, Al-Qaeda, LET, etc., etc. But Pakistan has been using these, they nurtured, they are providing them funds, they provided them training, they provided them arms and ammunition. They nurtured them to further their own aims. Now they are paying the price. That's the sentence you used in the beginning. I fully support that.
True.
And this is going to hurt them. Even Nawaz Sharif's government, they took help during the election from one of the Taliban factions. So when you nurture them, when you give them all the support,
so you are paying the price.
A stage will come when you have to pay the price for it.
So you are paying the price for not trying to rein in terror groups.
Yes,
before I get in a view from Islamabad and take in Wajahat, Ambassador K.C. Singh, I mean, would it be fair to say today that the Pakistan state is not willing to realize that jihadis are a bigger menace than they had ever expected?
Well, yes and no, but I think this is a little more complicated because, as I said, after creating the division in the Taliban, the group that remained behind was going to hit back, but they've actually created a division in that group. Now, that may have other repercussions in Afghanistan later.
True.
But from their point of view, they have halved their strength and they're dealing with only one half, so they've cut the Masouds away, and there were also strikes, they had aerial strikes in the North Waziristan area just about 2-3 days ago. Now, this kind of aerial strike will not work. I think after dividing it, they'll have to now go after the rest. They cannot go on with aerial strikes and by cloak and dagger methods, weaning away people from them, because that will not work. They can only buy temporary peace, then the residual group will hit them back. They have to go out and get them.
Just for a moment, gentlemen, I just want to focus on the narrative that actually percolated through social media even as the operation was on or soon after the attack. And Wajahat, come in here on this one. I want to focus on the reaction that perhaps came in from many elements in Pakistan, including the likes of the LET, the tweets that came in from the Jamaat Dawa account, spreading what is an enormous amount of misinformation.
Hi, thanks for having me on. I first of all want to stress that all the arguments made so far are brilliant and on their own are very strong. But the situation on the ground is such, it seems, I must say, I'm afraid, that things are so nuanced and so fluid and so dynamic that I could pick holes in everybody's arguments as well. But that's not the point. I think the idea is to construct a larger narrative together, just for the purposes of the largely Indian audience which is watching this. This is what's going on in Pakistan. I'm not going to bore you with the details inside baseball about which group has been weaned away, and everybody knows about the famous case of blowback which this Islamic Republic has been facing for the last decade now of supporting proxy groups, which eventually evolved into terror groups. But the bottom line is the following, that the cases like this one, the ones which happened last night, are slowly indicating, but surely indicating, that there's a U-turn, there's a slow U-turn happening in the larger Pakistani narrative about how to deal with these bad guys. A lot of people still aren't convinced, as you pointed out, Anurava, that these are bad guys. A lot of people had the typical knee-jerk reaction that Indian elements are involved. But I'll tell you what, a lot of people were very honest and very introspective and very tough on themselves. I'm talking about civilian leaders, military leaders, and of course journalists and opinion makers across the country who are seeing the light, who do know that incidents like this one, brazen attacks which humiliate the country and isolate it further, like this one, need to be, well, eventually dealt with. Now, just to give you a broad analogy, this is what's up. A lot of institutions in Pakistan, including the military, the civilian institutions, journalism, etc., everybody was in one direction when it came to largely tolerating the proxy groups. All of a sudden, 9/11 happened. And all of a sudden, the one institution fast trained to take those U-turns, took a partial U-turn. That was the Pakistani military. Everybody else was slow to take the U-turn. A lot of people are still in the process of taking the U-turn and turning their back. Finally, personally, professionally, ethnically, morally, taking the U-turn on these guys. But it seems that the different elements in Pakistan haven't been able to convince each other or convince themselves about the real threat, which is terror. However, just to give you again the big picture, 2 years ago, a similar attack down the street at a naval base ended up in destroying or dismantling more than half of this country's naval aviation fleet.
Right.
All right? That was bad. This was relatively much better. It was done and over with in a few hours. They were prepared for it, relatively better prepared for it. They knew what was coming their way because they'd been down there before.
Vajad, you painted that big picture, but nevertheless, it doesn't take away from the fact that there was a major intelligence lapse. Ambassador Casey Singh, if I can bring you on the question that I was trying to ask Vajad, the fact is, even as this attack was underway, or the operations to finish this attack was underway, there was a huge amount of discourse that was playing out, perhaps on social media, about Indian-made arms, about the presence of perhaps Indian-made arms being left, or bulletproof jackets, etc., being left. Do you believe that there are many elements from within Pakistan, including the likes of the LET, the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, etc., who would now use this as an opportunity?
Well, they will attempt to use it, but I'm sure people in Pakistan are smart, journalists are alert. They'll have to be, simply because there is some weapon which surfaces. Firstly, we have no evidence that there was any weapon which had any link to India. Secondly, even if they were there, we know that weapons are seized in Kashmir Valley by militants in the past. Sometimes at the border, at the line of control itself, that has happened. So it's possible there may be odd weapons floating around from the past. But considering the new government in India has just taken over, something like this had to be planned well in advance. It would have been planned sometime around the end of May, which is when the split in the Taliban took place. It would take them 2-3 weeks to do it. And in any case, Karachi has Taliban present there, and both the groups would be there. So they would have done the recce, etc. So for a new government which has just taken over in India, it was just unimaginable that anybody would get involved in a thing like this, either the previous government, which was on its way out, or the new government, which wasn't even settled. So who's going to even theoretically believe something like this? So therefore, this is something where Pakistan government, I'm sure, will come out with the proof, will show what the links are of these people. There were some reports that some of them look like Uzbeks or Central Asian. It's possible because...
Can I jump in here?
That's true. Vajad, I'll just come to you in a bit. Amit Barua, if I can bring you in, because both Ambassador Singh pointed to alert journalists, etc. But Vajad, I know, was here on India at 9 a couple of nights ago, debating with us the GeoTV suspension. You know, the fact is that there is a kind of clampdown in Pakistan. There are attempts to curb free speech. There are attempts, in a sense, to circumscribe this space that is available for free speech. And it can really have a larger impact in a situation as critical and as crucial as this one.
Well, Anuva, I must tell you that, having lived and worked as the Hindus correspondent in Pakistan, I must tell you that Pakistani journalists are very brave. They work under very adverse conditions, and they are in a position, and they have displayed in the past, that they are one of the pillars of Pakistani civil society. So I think journalism in Pakistan is very difficult to practice, but many of these practitioners have done the profession proud. Having said that, you know, what has happened with Jio and what is happening to the media, I think it's symptomatic of the kind of power, especially television, has got in Pakistan today. I mean, the fact that the ISI was locked in a conflict with Jio TV shows in itself the power of Jio and the power of television. So the larger point that I'm trying to make here is that civil society institutions, democratic institutions have been strengthened to a large degree in Pakistan. And today, the institutions that held total sway are being questioned. Questions are being asked about their role and their importance in Pakistan. But I think the larger point is that in the civil society and all that we've seen, and we talk about, you know, this group and that group, I think the larger issue is that the Pakistani state, whether it's the military or the civilian government, needs to understand the seriousness of the situation. And this is a question which has been posed to it time and again, that it is a very serious issue for them. The need to take on these groups, the need to neutralize them. The fact that you can hit the Karachi airport with such impunity, the kind of signal that it sends out to the rest of the world is only this, that it's not safe to come to Pakistan, it's not safe to visit. These are the real signals that it sends out. So my real issue, my real concern is that we have seen in the past that the political establishment, be it of any political party, has not been in tune, has not been able to take on these forces along with the military, whether we like it or not. The military is the force which is required to take these forces on. So this U-turn which Wajahat was talking about, maybe the U-turn will still happen amongst other sections, but really I think time is running out, and the fact that Pakistanis want to live just like citizens of any other country, I think really the issue is that how long will they have to await the state to wake up and take them in that direction?
Let me take that U-turn back to Wajahat, who in fact made that point. Wajahat, answer this question. I think the big picture that comes out of today's attack is, like Amit's pointing out, the signals that it is sending out. How is Pakistan actually tackling terror? What is Pakistan's clear objective? Because there would be many who say that there is a kind of a vacillation that's happening. There is a vacillation that's happening between fighting terror and a vacillation that's happening about making peace with Taliban, or this is the Taliban that we can talk to?
That's an excellent question, in fact a pivotal question, and you must understand that even despite landmark moments like Benazir Bhutto being taken away from us because of terror, despite moments like that one, this country's not come on the same page. This country's major institutions have failed to come on the same page regarding fighting terror. That's how divided the internal narrative is. But just so you know how institutions are changing and what Pakistan is doing, the latest, as was pointed out by the ambassador earlier, he was spot on with it, is to break these guys up via talks. So engage them, and whoever wants to talk, well, we will talk shop with him. Whoever doesn't want to talk, well, bang, bang, goodbye. Assassinations on the ground, airstrikes from the air, working with the Americans and ISAF NATO forces across the border for those guys who cross over, working with the Afghans. That's not working out very well, of course, but it's a broader effort. Now, what's really happened in the last few days is critical. Everybody needs to understand it. That just yesterday, the Pakistani state, including the military, gave a 15-day heads up to the people of North Waziristan to either expel those elements which want to go on fighting, those terrorists who do not want to talk, and or face the consequences. It's a strange deadline to give to your own people. But again, the people are mixed up in all of this, partially. Not all of them, of course. Some of them are just poor farmers and peasants, but there is local protection. Peace agreements on the ground, it has been reminded to the locals of North Waziristan that need to be honored. To the typical urban Indian, this wouldn't make sense. Peace agreements of the Pakistani state and the military with its own people, yes, but those are the strange rules. Those are the old colonial era rules which have stuck on and gone on to haunt this poor country. So that's a different debate. But bottom line is, what we're talking about, that U-turn is critical. Some elements in this country are already committed to it.
You know, I'll take the nugget of that back to Ambassador K.C. Singh, who talked about that split in the Pakistan Taliban in the first place. But the fact, Ambassador K.C. Singh, is that while there may be some who may be calling it a U-turn that can be used by the Pakistan state, the fact is the Pakistan state and the military really haven't been on the same page on anything. So I'm taking that question that I put to Wajahat, really. How is Pakistan fighting terror?
I agree with you, and that split itself may not be just to counter the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, though that is the primary motive, because the split group works closely with the Haqqani group and the Afghan Taliban. So it may be part of also a design for greater intervention in Afghanistan after the US withdrawal. So as the army does a tactical thing to deal with Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, they are planning to use the elements they have weaned away, not to bring them into the mainstream of Pakistani life, but to use them for their political ends in Afghanistan. No, this is not a lesson learned. This is simply a tactical rearrangement where you get the bear off your back, but you are using also for a future operation. Then this cycle will go on, because there will be retaliation from the Afghan side, from others who get affected. So you may douse the fires temporarily, but you'll create a greater conflagration for yourself.
You know, Amit Barua, just to put a counter to that in a sense, because critics have actually pointed out many times that this actually allows these militants to regroup and re-strength, and then you have an attack of the kind that you've had today.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you know, obviously the Pakistani state feels, and this is a difficult area. I mean, you know, North Waziristan and other places are not easy to launch big operations, send in people, all those things are there. But at the end of the day, we have to look at the record. Are people safer there? And is the rest of the region safer on account of what is happening in Pakistan? And the answer must be no. So I think really the issue is, the willingness to take on terror must be demonstrated. And I think whatever the name you give to these groups, because at the end of the day, what is happening is that the signals that are going out loud and clear to everyone is that this is a state which is afraid to confront militants, which is afraid to confront terrorists. And I think that, I'm afraid, in today's day and age, these kinds of signals can be really serious and have major consequences for any country that is unwilling to do so.
I think that's at the bottom line of it. How does General Qadian, Pakistan, give these signals that it is willing to rein in terror? So far, nothing really has given confidence, whether it's trying to break the Pakistan Taliban, whether it's trying to engage in talks with one section of the Pakistan Taliban. Clearly, nothing is working. So how does Pakistan actually demonstrate the fact that it wants to do this?
To the public that suffers in these kind of attacks, it makes no difference which faction of the Taliban is involved in it. The problem lies in the duplicity in the policy that Pakistan is following. They are trying to control these militant groups internally, but they are also trying to use them externally, both in Afghanistan and in India. Unless they follow one uniform policy, I mean, the Rangers have done a good job. They killed all the 10 militants in Karachi. They perhaps prevented a hijack, which may have been one of the aims. But the effective defense against these attacks lies not in reactive response, but in preventing such attacks. That can only happen when they have a very strong intelligence network. This problem is not only peculiar to Pakistan. India should also be prepared. That attack in Herat could be just a warning shot. It came immediately after the election when the swearing-in took place and Mr. Nawaz Sharif accepted the... I think both countries have to be ready. If Pakistan sincerely means to control this kind of militancy internally, they also have to stop supporting them externally and using them for their strategic gains, both in Afghanistan because the NATO forces are moving out, and also in India, which they have never stopped since 1989. So I think Pakistan needs to make up its mind what policy it wants to follow.
Needs to make up its mind what policy it wants to follow. Gentlemen, I'll just do a final round as we wrap up this debate here on India at 9. Ambassador K.C. Singh, do you believe that this particular attack really impacts relations with India in any way? Do you believe it's given a handle to some elements in Pakistan to talk about some right-wing groups here in India, or is that of no consequence?
I don't think so. I don't think anyone in Pakistan would take this kind of a charge seriously, that India had a hand in it.
Sure.
That's about the only thing which could have affected. If some Indian weapons, etc., were with these people, maybe an attempt was made by some of these groups which are under pressure. This always happens when the Pakistani military starts taking action on the western frontier against these groups. They try creating a situation where the Indian military draws the attention of the Pakistani military. So you create tension with India, but that's not going to work, because Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has just been here, and the evidence is very tenuous, is just notional. No one's going to believe it. The transition is just, so I don't think it's going to affect anything. But really, it is, it's decision time for Pakistan. Clock is running. They have to act fast.
Amit Barua, the clock is running, says Ambassador KC Singh. I know Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif had recently, I think, told the BBC that he was still hopeful that a peace initiative with the Taliban could succeed. Do you believe after today's attack he would be still as hopeful?
Well, I think that, you know, the whole issue of dialogue was something with a big question mark. I think attacks like this really, you know, make the question mark bigger, is that what is the purpose of the peace talks? I think the effort was, as Wajahat was saying, the effort was probably to wean away guys or break them away and make sure that those who want to talk or those who want to return to the mainstream, you know, they could come back.
True.
But obviously that's not a policy that seems to be working, because the army, the Pakistan army on its own has been sending out signals that it's not happy with this peace process, and there has been engagement with militants and terrorists in different places. So this is a signal which parallelly the army has been sending out. I'm afraid we don't know much about the mind of you know, the new army chief here in India as to what his approach is to these entire question. But really, I think that the larger issue is that each time such big attacks happen, the world takes notice. But at the same time, what happened to the Shia pilgrims in Balochistan, all these issues, all this really tells you a story of a country which is in deep crisis, which is at odds with itself in terms of deciding what its future should be. Like, does it want to join the rest of the region and the rest of the world in giving its citizens a better life, or is it interested in a very narrow understanding of religion and ensuring that narrow understanding of religion becomes the structure of governance? So I think really the political class in Pakistan needs to take a call as to what kind of I mean, if we talk about democracy, about strengthening democracy, then I think that the hardline notions of Islam that some people are trying to foist on Pakistan should be rejected. I think these are all very critical issues for Pakistan to grapple with. And really, I think if they do make this U-turn, I think they will find that there's a lot of support for them, and there will be a lot of help forthcoming in trying to change the trajectory of Pakistan, in trying to build a different future for the country.
Wajahat, I'm going to give you the final word here. Do you think that U-turn really is possible? And I'm coming back to the media question for lots of reasons. I mean, I don't mean to trivialize it, but less than 12 hours, I think, after the operation or after the attacks in Taftan, and this operation was undergoing, Dawn News about 11:30 a.m. broadcast was about lemon butter fish. Pakistan TV was putting out a US skiing operation, I think, on its telecast. Again, I'm underlining the fact that there is nothing that takes away from the brave Pakistani journalists, but this really is an atmosphere of clampdown. Do you believe, as Amit Barua and Ambassador KC Singh has said, that that U-turn really is possible?
I think the crux of that decision will have to be figured out by the new civilian leadership. This military has ceded a lot of ground, believe it or not. A military which used to run proxy wars without checking in with the civilian government, a military which used to develop nuclear weapons without checking in with planet Earth, struggled recently to shut down a Mayor TV station. That's how much ground this military has ceded. That's how much things in Pakistan have changed. That's the big picture on this military's commitment. And just so you know, I feel that Amit has nailed it on the head. This new government, which has a lot of responsibilities, needs to move and seize the moment and take this. They're not doing it for whatever many reasons. It's complicated. The Saudi alliance, the innate conservatism of the Sharifs. The bottom line, though, is that this military doesn't feel that it's ready to go ahead and say, all right, we're declaring war. This new civilian leadership, newly empowered civilian leadership must seize the moment. And I'm wondering what's holding them back. And I keep on going back to that internal division in Pakistan, that internal conviction about how bad the bad guys really are. As for the media, lemon butter fish might be fun and games, Anuradha, but I can guarantee you that a lot of us risked our lives to report last night. And we'll keep on doing it.
And that's one of the reasons I prefixed that. And that's one of the reasons I prefixed that question. I'll have to end it here, gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us here on India at 9. We've been debating the question, has Pakistan really acted in an effective, in a cohesive manner? Has it really been able to rein in terror groups? Well, opinion really on the same lines, but the military establishment, the Pakistan state, perhaps all our panelists agreeing to the fact, needs to seize the moment. We'll take